3 days after I walked out, my dad sent me a Venmo request for $2,400 in back rent. After years of paying their bills, fixing their house, and giving up my own future to support them, they called me a thief. Hi, I'm Marin. I didn't scream when they told me to leave. I packed what I paid for, printed the receipts, and walked away without a word. But what came next, lawyers' lies, and even a check from my mother, was something I never expected. Have you ever been erased by the people you gave everything to? What would you do if your family tried to charge you for loving them? The house smelled like warmed-over roast and lemon-scented disinfectant, the kind of clean that tried too hard. I set my keys on the counter beside a ceramic rooster cookie jar that hadn't held cookies since I was in high school and took a deep breath. The light above the dining table flickered once, twice, then settled into a dim hum. Dad sat at the head of the table, sleeves rolled to his elbows like he had done some hard thinking. Riley, of course, was halfway through a bowl of mac and cheese that looked like it had been reheated 3 times. His phone buzzed, and he chuckled at something he didn't share. I opened the fridge for a soda and heard Dad's voice slice across the room, low and direct. Some people have gotten too comfortable thinking they can take without ever giving back. The room stilled, except for the flicker of the overhead light and the hum of the refrigerator. I didn't move. Must be nice, Riley mumbled, not looking up. Living rent-free like some guest who never left. That stung more than I expected. I turned slowly to face them. Excuse me, Dad didn't even glance at me. You know what I mean. I set the soda down. Actually, I don't. So please clarify, because I've been paying the utility bills for this house since 2020. I paid for the new water heater when the old one burst, the fridge. That came from my stimulus check. And the roof patch last winter. That was me too. Riley snorted. She's keeping a ledger now. I looked at Mom. Her mouth was pressed into a thin line, eyes fixed on her plate where a scoop of cold casserole sat untouched. She didn't speak. Dad leaned back in his chair, folding his arms like he was preparing for a business meeting. So, what you want, a medal? I want acknowledgement, I said quietly. I want basic respect. He scoffed. Respect doesn't come from throwing money in people's faces. You think that makes you better than us? No, I replied, voice steady. I think it means I've been supporting a house I no longer feel welcome in. Mom finally spoke, her voice so soft I had to strain to hear it. Maybe it's time you move out then. The words landed like a slap, quiet, clean, undeniable. I stared at her, waiting for her to flinch, to retract, to say she didn't mean it like that, but she didn't even blink. I looked around the room, really looked. The couch I bought after the old one gave Dad back pain. The toaster I picked up because Mom said the old one burned her English muffins. The coffee table with the chip in the corner Riley caused, but blamed on the cat. I've lived here for 12 years, I said more to myself than them. Helped after Dad got laid off. Put my plans on hold when Mom got hurt. This wasn't charity, it was family. Dad stood, calm, final. You're not family if you think we owe you something. We never asked for your help. If you can't be part of this house without holding it over us, then maybe you don't belong in it anymore. The room went impossibly still. Outside wind rustled through the oak tree in the front yard. Inside, I could hear the soft buzz of Riley's phone and the sound of my own breathing. I looked at my plate. Still full. I hadn't even sat down. I picked up my fork, wrapped it in the napkin I'd folded earlier, and walked out of the kitchen. Not a word, not a sound. The hallway to my room felt longer than usual. The pictures on the wall blurred as I passed them. Graduation, Christmas, the camping trip in '09. All smiling faces, all outdated. In my room, I closed the door gently and leaned against it. My chest felt tight, but my eyes stayed dry. I had the strange sensation of being both in my body and hovering outside it, like I was watching someone else's scene play out. I could still hear their muffled voices, forks clinking Riley's laugh, Dad saying something about finally some peace, and Mom's silence. That was the loudest of all. Funny how many times she'd said family sacrifices in silence. And now silence was all I had left. They thought they were cutting me loose. But in truth, I'd been unraveling from them for a long time. Tonight was just the first time they noticed. and maybe the first time I was ready to admit it. The folders were spread across my bed, like a paper snowstorm: receipts, utility bills, handwritten notes on the backs of grocery lists. My room, the one I was supposed to start packing, soon had become a forensic scene of my own past generosity. I didn't sleep. I didn't cry. I just kept sorting. The overhead bulb buzzed softly, casting everything in a yellow wash. Outside, a light drizzle tapped at the window like someone too polite to knock. I pulled out the file marked 2021. Spring. Tucked between car maintenance receipts and a dentist copay was the invoice from the night the furnace broke. $800. Paid on my debit card. The repairman's name was scrawled across the bottom, Tony. He had called me Miss Quinn, and I'd smiled at how that made me sound like a schoolteacher. That night Riley had blown the fuse, trying to plug in a second gaming monitor. He swore it wasn't his fault, blamed bad house wiring. He went to bed early, still swearing, and left me to deal with the frozen vents and Mom's worried pacing. I paid it because someone had to. Another folder held the insurance bill from when Dad forgot to renew it. The envelope had sat unopened on the kitchen table for 3 weeks. He kept saying I'll get to it until I quietly drove to the office and took care of it myself. $132.46. Paid in full. That was the winter Mom slipped on the back step and cracked her wrist. She couldn't hold a pen for 6 weeks. None of it had been written down until now. Naomi had called me earlier that evening after I'd walked out of the kitchen. I hadn't told her much, just enough to explain the silence. She didn't press. Just said, if they're going to pretend your help didn't exist, maybe it's time you make a record of it. She didn't sound angry, just tired for me. Now I was doing just that. I printed statements from my bank highlighting grocery store totals, Amazon orders for paper towels and dish soap, even the electric bill when it jumped in summer. I cross-referenced every line with a sticky note. It was obsessive, and it felt good. At some point, I opened a new document and typed in block letters, what I actually owe. I inserted the logo from my firm just for structure. I wasn't planning to submit it to anyone, but I needed the clarity. The act of organizing was a way of stitching myself back together. The room smelled faintly of printer toner and peppermint lotion, the kind of scent you don't realize you miss until it returns quietly through a drawer you haven't opened in months. I reached into the bottom of that drawer, searching for more envelopes, and found an old phone charger, a dried-out lip balm, and Riley's Venmo request from last year. The printed copy had slipped behind a folder. Can you cover me until next Friday? Just $60. Promise I'll Venmo you back. The timestamp was from 18 Fridays ago. I laughed. Not out loud, but somewhere inside the part of me that had started to harden. The same part that used to send money without question. I used to think that meant I was dependable. Now I wasn't so sure. I clicked open a folder on my laptop labeled Family. Inside were old recipes, photos, a scanned copy of Mom's driver's license for when she needed help ordering something online. There was a file I hadn't noticed before, a text thread export Dad had sent me months ago for a phone issue. I clicked it open more out of boredom than anything else. That's when I saw it. A message chain. Not meant for me. She's gotten too comfortable. Time to have that talk. She'll cry, but she'll land on her feet. There was no malice in the words, just calculation. Like I was a project that needed concluding. Like my breakdown had been penciled into their calendar. The room went silent in a new way. Not the soft stillness of night, but the heavy quiet of recognition. I closed the laptop slowly, as if not to wake something. Then very clearly I whispered, I'm done crying. It wasn't a promise. It was a statement of fact. A decision already made. The paper piles would stay for now. Tomorrow, I'd pack the things that were mine. But tonight, I was done explaining, done justifying, done proving my worth to people who had already decided I didn't have any. Some debts aren't about dollars. They're about the silence you give and how much it cost you to keep giving it. The morning mist was the kind that settled into the joints of the porch and clung to the mailbox. The cold wasn't biting, it was quiet. I slipped on my canvas jacket, zipped halfway, and stepped inside for what would be the last time. The hallway lights were off. Upstairs, Riley was still asleep or pretending to be. Mom's door was shut. The air smelled faintly of cinnamon Glade spray and something sour underneath. I walked straight to the kitchen. On the counter sat the toaster I bought 2 summers ago, the brushed steel kind with 4 slots and a frozen setting. I had picked it out after Mom burned a bagel and muttered, "Nothing works in this house anymore." She smiled when I brought it home. "No need to keep the receipt. You live here." But I had kept it anyway. And now taped to its side was a yellow sticky note purchased by MQ. June 2021. $54.99, Target receipt number 87293. The blender came next. Then the Dutch oven. Then the water pitcher with the fancy filter I'd bought when the tap started tasting like old pipes. Each item carefully labeled, each movement deliberate. I moved through the house like a tenant performing an exit inspection. The living room still held that sagging couch, the one they refused to get rid of, until I showed up one day with a new one. That couch wasn't mine. Neither were the throw pillows or the family photo above the fireplace, our last trip to the coast where everyone smiled and nobody spoke. But the router, that was mine. The surge protector under the TV, mine. The Keurig I got during a Black Friday deal, also mine. Everything came with proof. I boxed them carefully, wrapping cords and placing things in their original packaging where I could. I wasn't angry. I wasn't rushing. I was surgical. Upstairs, I left the dresser with the faded dolphin stickers on the top drawer. It was mine once, but now it belonged to the ghost of someone I didn't recognize. I folded the quilt Grandma made into the closet corner and placed my hand on it for a breath longer than I expected. That stayed too. I didn't take anything sentimental. Only what had been mine, or what I'd bought to make their lives easier. Naomi texted at 6:12 a.m. Outside, no rush. She didn't knock, just waited, engine idling like we'd planned. The first box was light kitchenware. The second, heavier, was electronics. By the 4th trip down the porch steps, my fingers had gone stiff from the cold. Naomi opened the passenger door and looked at me without speaking. I handed her the next box, and we moved like clockwork. Once everything was in the back seat and trunk, I walked to the kitchen table and placed a printed spreadsheet next to the salt shaker. It listed everything I was taking, item, date, receipt number, cost, no commentary, just facts. Then I walked to the fridge. There, under the magnet shaped like a pineapple Mom picked up in Florida, I taped a single white sheet. I didn't steal anything. I just took what was already mine. MQ. I stepped back and looked at it, not for drama, just to make sure it was straight. As I reached the front door, the unmistakable sound of tires crunching gravel stopped me. Through the small frosted window, I saw the outline of Dad's truck pulling into the driveway. The morning fog softened the headlights, but I knew it was him. I didn't hesitate. I opened the door, stepped out, and walked down the steps without turning around. Naomi met my eyes. She didn't say a word, just unlocked the passenger door. Behind me, the engine cut off. I heard the car door creak open, but I kept walking. I got in, buckled my seatbelt, exhaled slowly. Naomi put the car in drive. We didn't speak as we pulled away. There was no need. I watched the house recede in the rearview mirror. The porch, the chipping paint on the banister, the dent on the garage from Riley's old bike. Familiar. Ordinary. I didn't cry. Not this time. There's a kind of strength in silence that no one can see until it walks away with the receipts taped to every item that made their lives easier. 3 days after I left, I got a Venmo request from my father. Back rent, $2,400. No message, no explanation. Just that. I stared at the notification like it was a punchline missing its joke. But it wasn't a joke. It was exactly what it looked like, a final attempt to regain control. Or maybe rewrite the story. Outside my window, November leaves spun in little circles down the sidewalk, brittle and orange against the gray. My apartment still smelled faintly like paint and dried eucalyptus from the flower shop below. Most of my boxes were half open, the kind of unpacking that signaled I was here but not settled. I didn't answer the Venmo. A few hours later, I got a text from Mom. Please return the toaster and the Wi-Fi router. They weren't yours to take. Then another from Dad. You left without notice. That's considered theft. The word theft sat bitter in my mouth. I took what I bought, what I maintained, what I kept working while they critiqued the cost of electricity or complained that the faucet pressure was too low. I waited, not to be strategic, just to be sure I wasn't answering in heat. Then I opened the folder I had labeled Family Ledger and spent the afternoon formatting a PDF. Each item had its own line toaster target, June 2021, $54,999, Wi-Fi, router, Best Buy, Sept 2020, $89,000, water heater repair, Tony's Plumbing, Jan 2021, $800 furnace rewiring electric fix, Octi 2021, $214. I included bank statements, screenshots of Venmo payments I'd sent to Riley, even the grocery list I'd covered in the week Mom sprained her wrist and couldn't drive. I gave it a professional header, just my name, the date, and 2 words centered at the top documentation summary. I sent it by email. 1 line in the body attached is a complete record of what I contributed between 2020 and 2023. Feel free to forward it to your lawyer. Then I made myself a cup of mint tea and watched the sky soften toward dusk. 2 days later, a letter arrived. Certified mail. The envelope was thick, the kind you get when something isn't casual. Inside was a letter from an attorney, someone named Grant Middleton. Stationery with his name embossed in a serif font. The language was formal, but pointed. Client asserts that multiple household items were removed without permission. This constitutes potential theft of shared property. If items are not returned within 7 business days, further legal action may be pursued. I sat at the table with the letter in my lap and thought about how far people will go to avoid saying they're wrong, that they were unkind, that they treated help like obligation and generosity like leverage. Naomi dropped by that evening. She brought soup from her favorite Thai place and didn't ask questions until I showed her the letter. She skimmed it once, then raised an eyebrow. "You ready to hit back?" "No," I said. "I'm ready to answer." We spent the next morning at a notary's office, quiet and efficient. I printed everything again: receipts, statements, photos of the appliance serial numbers. I included a copy of my original spreadsheet, now signed and dated. The notary, a kind older woman with lavender nails, slid the final page across the table and said, "You're being very thorough." "I have to be," I replied. "They're pretending I was never there." The packet went out certified just like theirs. Return receipt requested. Then silence. No more texts. No more requests. No new Venmo charges. Just nothing. But it wasn't tense like the silences I knew back in that house. It wasn't cold or punishing. It was empty. And oddly, that emptiness felt clean. I started sleeping through the night again. In the evenings, I watered the tiny ivy plant Naomi gave me and played soft jazz through my speakers. I didn't check my phone every 10 minutes. The world didn't feel like it was crashing inward. It just kept moving. Then came the voicemail. "It's your mother," her voice said, hushed and tired. "I don't know why you're doing this. We didn't raise you to humiliate us." The message ended without a goodbye. I replayed it once just to be sure I'd heard her right. Then I pressed delete. This wasn't about humiliation. It was about memory, about reality, about telling the truth in writing when words had failed for too long. I wasn't reacting anymore. I was responding. With facts, with records, with calm. Because when they rewrote the story to make me the villain, they forgot something important. I kept the receipts. Mrs. Rayburn called on a Monday. Her voice on the other end of the line was laced with something between concern and polite confusion. "Sweetheart, I hope I'm not overstepping, but are you all right? Your father told folks you stormed out and took half the house with you." I stood in the tiny kitchen of my apartment, blinking at the second-hand tea kettle that was just beginning to hiss. He said that, "Well, it's what I heard at book club," she admitted. People were surprised. "You always seemed so steady." I didn't know what to say to that. So I said the only thing that felt honest. "I'm okay. Thank you for checking in." There was a pause. Then she added gently, "If you ever want to have coffee, I'd like that." That Friday, we met at a cafe tucked between a dry cleaner and a shoe repair shop, the kind of place with chipped mugs and Christmas music playing too early. Mrs. Rayburn wore a pea coat with a brooch shaped like a cardinal. She ordered chamomile tea and offered me a lemon bar she'd made herself. Halfway through the conversation, I pulled a folded sheet from my purse, a single invoice, the insurance renewal I had paid under my name back when Dad forgot. I didn't speak, just slid it across the table and let her read it. She nodded once, then returned the paper without a word. I didn't need validation, but it was comforting to be seen by someone who didn't start from judgment. That weekend, I baked banana bread, 3 loaves. I wrapped them in parchment and twine, labeled each with a little handwritten card, from Marin, apt to be. Then I went door to door in my building, delivering them like offerings. A man down the hall told me his daughter was allergic to bananas, but he'd give it to his sister. A woman with a therapy dog invited me to her knitting group. Someone left a note under my door the next day. That bread made my whole morning. Thank you. Small gestures. But they made the new place feel less temporary. On Sunday afternoon, Naomi picked me up for a peer support circle at the library. We didn't talk much on the way. She just adjusted the heater vents toward me and let me be. The meeting room was warm and quiet. Folding chairs arranged in a circle, a table with tea bags and paper cups in the corner. The women ranged in age, some near my mother's, others closer to mine. One woman wore a scarf around her head. Another had a notebook open, but hadn't written a thing. A woman named Lydia spoke first. Her daughter had blocked her number 6 months ago. She said I was too controlling, Lydia said. But I wanted her to have everything. Another woman teared up when she talked about her brother cutting ties after a dispute over their father's will. No shouting, no accusations, just silence, and then distance. I listened, not just to the words, but to the tremble underneath them. When it was my turn, I hesitated. Then I said I lived in a house that didn't want me. I gave everything until they asked for more. The words hung in the air, simple and sharp. No one rushed to fill the space. No advice. Just nod slow, knowing heavy. Later, as we packed up the chairs, Lydia touched my arm. That line, she said. I've never heard it said quite like that before. I just smiled. Sometimes the truth doesn't need a lot of space, just someone willing to hold it. A few days later, an envelope arrived in the mail. No return address. My name written in familiar cursive. Inside was a short note handwritten in blue ink. We didn't realize how much you did. Maybe we were too hard. This isn't how family should fall apart. Mom folded inside the card was a check for $1,500. On the memo line, she'd written partial repayment. There was no apology, no phone number, just that. I sat with the check for a while, holding it like it might dissolve in my hand. Then I got up, grabbed my coat, and walked down to the local credit union. The teller was a young man with braces and a nervous smile. "How would you like to deposit this?" he asked. I slid a deposit slip across the counter. New account boundary fund. He didn't ask questions, just nodded and began typing. As I left the building, the winter air bit at my cheeks. I pulled my scarf tighter and looked up at the gray sky. The town was already glowing with Christmas lights, but I felt no pull toward nostalgia. This wasn't about holidays or forgiveness or dramatic reunions. It was about space, about the quiet dignity of claiming my own name again, and maybe, just maybe, learning how to build something better from the quiet they left behind. The listing called it Charming 3BR, partially updated, full of potential. I stared at the screen for a moment, then closed the tab. No mention of the kitchen light that always flickered. No note about the water heater I'd paid for. No history, just square footage and a mortgage estimate. I didn't know what I expected. Maybe a line that said, "House comes with ghosts," mostly silent. A little bitter. It was early April and Salem was starting to bloom. The cherry trees lining Liberty Street had popped overnight, scattering petals like confetti. My apartment smelled faintly of basil from the tiny pots I'd placed along the sill. They leaned toward the light the way I'd learned to. The bookshelf in the corner was thrifted. My mugs didn't match, and I liked them that way. I'd picked each one out slowly blue ceramic with a chipped handle, one with a faded World's Okayest Accountant label, another shaped like a fox. Nothing here was expensive, but it was all mine. Tom, the guy from the unit downstairs, knocked on my door midweek to ask if I wanted a flyer for the community workshop board. You know, in case you ever want to teach one, he said, people like practical stuff, budgeting taxes, how to survive on coffee and hope. I smiled. Funny timing. Because I had accepted a new job part-time but meaningful, teaching financial literacy workshops at a women's shelter. My first session was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Budgeting Boundaries When Love Comes with Strings. Naomi helped me write the title. She said it sounded like something people would actually read. Then she hugged me in the kind of quiet way that said, I see you. No applause. Just presence. That Friday, I walked past my old neighborhood on the way to pick up a book I'd left at Naomi's. The house looked smaller somehow. Not physically, just emotionally. A new couple stood on the front lawn with a realtor pointing at the shutters and nodding like they could see themselves inside. For a second, I wanted to say something, warn them maybe, but I didn't. They'd fill the rooms with their own stories. I hoped they'd be better ones. That night, I got a message from Riley. Hope you're happy. You ruined everything. You really think you're better than us? I stared at the screen for a beat. Then I archived the thread and turned off my phone. Some conversations don't need replies. Some doors stay closed for a reason. On the morning of my first class, I wore a navy cardigan and brought a lemon muffin I didn't end up eating. The community center smelled like old linoleum and fresh coffee. Folding chairs were set up in 2 loose rows. The women trickled in slowly, a few with notebooks, one with a stroller. I started the session by writing a question on the whiteboard. What's the difference between help and obligation? We talked about budgeting basics, how to separate joint accounts, how to say no without apology. Then a young woman in the back, barely 19 by the look of her, raised her hand. How do you know, she asked, voice tight, with something unsaid, when it's okay to leave your family? The room fell still. I met her eyes. When they stop being family, I said gently, and start being debt collectors. She nodded. One of the older women reached across the aisle to hand her a tissue. When the session ended, I stayed back to clean up. The chairs squeaked as I stacked them. The whiteboard was half erased, my handwriting smudged but still legible. Back at my apartment, I pulled out my notebook, the same one I'd used to keep track of receipts and account balances. Tucked inside was the check stub from December. I hadn't thrown it away. I didn't need it, but I kept it as proof that even if they hadn't given me an apology, they'd given me something close to acknowledgement. I slid it into a pocket at the back of the notebook, then flipped to a clean page. At the top, I wrote, "Freedom isn't a gift. It's a cost you stop paying." I closed the notebook and placed it on my shelf beside my favorite mug. I didn't need closure. I had something better. I had peace. Some homes get sold with fresh paint and flattering words, but no listing ever says, once someone here gave too much and left quietly. Watching that house fade behind new curtains didn't hurt the way I thought it would. It just confirmed I'd outgrown the version of myself that once begged to stay. What I've learned is this: not every family knows how to love gently, and not every goodbye is loud. Sometimes dignity is quiet. Sometimes strength looks like starting again with less noise but more truth. And in this world, it's okay to walk away from people who keep mistaking your kindness for currency. If you've ever felt like love came with conditions, or that your care was counted like a receipt, know this: your worth was never up for negotiation. And healing doesn't always come with closure. Sometimes it just comes with peace. If this story touched something in you, I invite you to share your own reflection, whether whispered over coffee or written in a note. We all carry chapters like this, and maybe by speaking them aloud, we help someone else feel a little less alone.